Who would have thought the 8th chapter in the Star Wars saga would prove to be so divisive? Since December, there have been endless debates among different camps regarding its quality. When I first watched The Last Jedi, I really enjoyed it, and then went on with my day. But I guess it's now my turn to throw my hat into the ring with my own stance on Rian Johnson's space opera. There are quite a number of bullet points to get through, which will include spoilers, and much like the film itself, I will focus on the 3 central plot points. Let's start with Luke and Rey. One point of contention for a lot of people was the depiction of Luke Skywalker. He was not entirely the young, hopeful hero we saw in the original trilogy. In The Last Jedi, he's now become a cynical hermit who has cut himself off from the Force and would prefer to live alone on this island. Describing Luke like that, I can see how this rubs some people the wrong way. However, within the franchise's timeline, it's been 30 years since we last saw Luke, and a lot can happen in 30 years that can change a person. Even in the original trilogy, the Luke we see in Return of the Jedi had evolved considerably from the Luke we first met, and who would say things like this.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
We don't get too much information about Luke's adventures between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, but the glimpses we see provide an idea of why he ended up on that island. This is a Luke still grappling from the regret and shame he feels with how he dealt with Kylo Ren's turn to the dark side. I think a lot of us have made fleeting decisions that we look back on and feel we could have done differently. There's also this fear inside of him that, much like the Jedi Council from years ago, he will probably play a role in creating the next Darth Vader, which explains his trepidation at teaching Rey. The most pivotal scene for Luke is the one he shares with Yoda. It's an important teaching moment for Luke, as he seems intent on ending the Jedi line, but Yoda shows the importance of moving forward and what can be learned from history's mistakes. I also love the teaching moments between Luke and Rey, and in particular how we finally see a visual representation of the Force and what it means to go to the dark side. Throughout the series, we're often told about Jedis being seduced by the dark side, but I believe this is the first time we're shown what that is. It allows us to further understand Luke's worry about Rey going over. And like Luke, Rey is also caught up with the past as she thinks Luke redeeming Darth Vader can also be applied to Kylo Ren. There's this frequent expectation from Luke, Rey, and the First Order that Kylo Ren is like Darth Vader, albeit for different reasons, when really he is his own person, with his own motivations and insecurities. What also proved to be a point of contention was the revelation that Rey's parents are nobodies. When The Force Awakens was released, there were these frequent fan theories that Rey having the Force meant she was a Skywalker or a Kenobi. And at the time I thought, what if she's related to nobody? So I was pleased that's the route they took. Star Wars is probably the smallest galaxy ever. Luke just happens to be Darth Vader's son. Leia just happens to be Luke's sister. Darth Vader just happens to have built C-3PO. Yoda just happens to have been friends with Chewbacca. So it's nice to see a major character in Star Wars who does not have a major pre-existing connection with anyone else. And I also feel somebody having the Force because of bloodlines takes some of the magic away. Isn't the whole appeal of the Force and Jedis when you're younger that anyone can possess those abilities? That's how I interpreted that final scene with the slave boy in the broom. Then we have Poe's subplot, with a lot of people feeling that Poe was unfairly demoted and not given a fair treatment by his superiors. I felt it was pretty well established that Poe was demoted for not directly following General Leia's orders during the opening battle. There's a time to be a hotshot maverick and a time to follow orders, and Poe seemed to put his own hatred for the First Order above heeding the advice of his commanding general, resulting in many unnecessary deaths. Leia was absolutely in her right to demote Poe. What seemed to really bother a number of viewers were the differing viewpoints from Poe and Vice Admiral Holdo. Some felt she kept too much of her plan a secret, even as the fuel on the Resistance ship was running low. I can understand why some felt that way, although I also understand Holdo's point of view after seeing Poe's brash actions earlier in the day. There's also the potential concern of a First Order mole on board. I'm not going to say every decision made by Holdo was the best one, but Poe was acting a little too hot-headed during the whole ordeal. Finally, there's the Finn-Rose subplot at the casino planet. This seems to be the section of the film that got the most negativity, with many folks deriding it as filler. While I can understand that, I really enjoyed this side quest. Part of the appeal of Star Wars for me is the world building and seeing the impact this conflict between the heroes and villains has on the galaxy. In any war, there'll be those who seek to profit from it, and we get to see that side of the galaxy in the Canto Bight section. I love seeing new locations in a Star Wars movie alongside new aliens. A frequent criticism of this section was that it was pointless because Finn and Rose did not succeed in their mission. But I like the message that not every plan the Resistance has will result in victory. Sometimes a plan goes up in smoke. This section also did the job of introducing Rose and developing Finn. Finn is still fresh from his defection from the First Order, and his mind is still focused on saving Rey. Even when he moves on from worrying about Rey, he is still dead set on stopping the First Order by flying straight into one of their weapons. It takes Rose for him to see the bigger picture and the important role he can play in the Resistance. I saw The Last Jedi before the general consensus had come out and been formed, so I watched it in a bubble and absolutely loved the Rose character. I expected her to be a fan favorite, which apparently was not the case. After rewatching The Last Jedi, I still think very highly of Rose Tico and think Kelly Marie Tran gave a wonderful performance. She's a character who has had to deal with so much, and yet she frequently attempts to shine some hope even in bad situations, and she's not afraid of showing her occasional disappointment in others. Rose's opening scene, where she goes from admiring Finn for his role in destroying Starkiller Base to being disappointed at him running off, is a prime example of how multi-layered she is. She's also a maintenance worker, and I like when Star Wars gives focus towards those members of the Resistance with jobs that maybe aren't seen as glamorous as Jedis or pilots, but they're no less important. Curiously, among the frequent debates and criticisms that have sprung up about The Last Jedi, I have never seen my main issue with the film mentioned by others. While I do think the film is great as a whole, I thought the third act was too action-heavy. I know it sounds odd to complain about action in a Star Wars movie, and the action in The Last Jedi is well choreographed and impressively put together, but there was so much of it in the third act, with little room for a breather. It's one action sequence after the other, which makes for very exhausting viewing after a while. It's why my favorite scene in the climax is when Luke and Leia meet again. It's such a quiet scene in the middle of the battles and lightsaber duels. Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher play their parts so beautifully here, and of course there's the added emotion of knowing this is the final time we'll ever see these characters interact. And just to make it even more heart-wrenching, John Williams plays Luke and Leia's theme from Return of the Jedi. One of the criticisms of The Last Jedi that has leapt out at me is that this and the other recent Star Wars are pushing social and political themes. I find this odd because the Star Wars films have always had these social and political elements, and they've never hidden them. In the original trilogy, the heroes are called rebels and the villains are the Empire. Not exactly subtle. I've also seen multiple remarks about The Last Jedi being the worst movie ever made, which is a bit of hyperbole. You're allowed to hate this film. If you didn't care for the direction or writing, fair enough. But did you also think the cinematography was terrible? Or the special effects? The production design? Are you telling me you hated the alien designs? There must have been at least one performance from the actors you liked. I find that for a film to be considered a candidate for the worst movie ever made, every little aspect of its production needs to be extremely low quality. Lastly, I want to address the divide within the Star Wars fanbase. I know there were many people who did not like this film, and if you have not seen one of my defense videos, I don't make these to change people's minds on a movie. They're more to present a different point of view. But a lot of The Last Jedi defenders have felt the need to group everyone who hated the film into a singular box, and I don't think that's entirely fair. If you did not agree with the direction taken with Luke Skywalker, I understand. If you did not think the attempts at humor gelled, I understand. If you were not wild about the pacing or did not think a subplot worked as well as others, I understand. Just because somebody hated The Last Jedi does not automatically make them a misogynistic fanboy who hates risk-taking and are too attached to the previous films. And just because somebody loves the film, like myself, it does not mean they're a Disney shill or whatever other derogatory term that has been thrown our way. I don't take any issue with people who hated The Last Jedi for perfectly legitimate reasons. Who I do have a problem with are the extremes of Star Wars fans, from both those who loved The Last Jedi and hated it. I've seen comments from people who loved The Last Jedi who then turned around and insulted anyone who loved Rogue One. That only creates further separation within the Star Wars fanbase. The worst people, though, are those who personally attacked the cast and crew involved in making The Last Jedi. One of the great things about social media is the ability to immediately connect and talk to those responsible for creating the entertainment we watch. I would think this would create more empathy and realize these are people like us, artists who put their all into making the best film or television series possible. Instead, you have those who use it as an opportunity to insult them and attack them and call them really horrible things. Why? Because they were involved with or appeared in something you didn't like? The amount of hateful remarks sent to Rian Johnson and Kelly Marie Tran are uncalled for, as are the derogatory things people have said about Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy. If you're one of those people who feels the need to send a filmmaker an angry message because you didn't like that film, I'm going to give you a suggestion of what's a better use of your time. Before you type a tweet at Rian Johnson saying how much you hated The Last Jedi, and believe me, he knows there are people out there who don't like the film, think about something you saw recently that you did love, whether it was a movie or a television series or a book, and send the creator a complimentary tweet. Was there a recent episode of a favorite television series you really loved? Then search for the creator on Twitter and let him know. Did you love Incredibles 2? Then go and tell Brad Bird. Try and do this on a regular basis, and you'll see how much more enjoyable it is. And this is, after all, the middle part of this new trilogy. Maybe where J.J. Abrams takes the series in Episode 9 will be more to your liking. And if the Star Wars franchise continues to disappoint you, there are so many other properties out there. With this endless amount of content that exists in the world unrelated to Star Wars, I don't understand this need to keep dwelling on a specific film and a franchise. With something as long-running as Star Wars, you were bound to see it go in creative directions you might disagree with. Or you just did not think it was a good or enjoyable piece of filmmaking. Both are fair assessments. Feel free to discuss where you stand on Star Wars The Last Jedi in the comments section. Keep it civil, be nice to each other, and I'll see you next time.